Quiet quitters avoid going above and beyond at work, and they reject the hustle culture mentality, where people work long hours, only resting for short periods of time, because they think it will lead to professional success. The term's mostly used by Gen Z workers, now in the workforce, who've helped the term go viral on TikTok, which is ablaze with the term. So what does quiet quitting look like? Mark, Matilda, thank you very much for joining me today to talk about such an interesting topic, and one that is very much of the moment. Had either of you heard of quiet quitting before we started talking about getting together today?
Not at all. So, it was a term, as you said, it's something that's common, I think referred to as working to rule, as we previously known. But I'm not on TikTok, so I think it went viral on TikTok. It was like 3 million viewers quite early, so it's sort of gone through that. So, not being ageist in that sense, but it was something that I wasn't aware of until we started talking about it. But then you start to listen, and it's really common.
Yeah. Matilda,
I've heard about it, I've read about it. It's been a lot in my different feeds on different platforms. Not maybe feeling too much about it or understanding the concept as such, but it's so well connected to everything that we do. And once you start talking to people do have quite a lot of opinions about it. So I think as a phenomena, yes, but maybe not the phrasing and such.
So Mark, when you started reading about it, although you hadn't heard the phrase before, did it resonate with you? Is it something that you recognised? Is quiet quitting really a new thing?
I don't believe it's new at all. So it's become a bit of the worry is if it's become a bit of a movement in terms of TikTok and social media and how it's driving and different generations. But I think it's been something that's been going on for years, if not decades, in terms of the layers, in terms of management engagement. Principally, it's about employees being engaged and feeling engaged. But for me, there seems to be sort of two sides to this quiet quitting just now. There's a worry and a concern, which is the negative side, and then there's a positive bit. So they talk about this sort of silent protest. So if people are not feeling engaged at work, so quiet quitting is they're cutting back. The other side is people taking more control of their life, so looking at well-being and what they want to do. And I think it's just been exacerbated by the lockdown, and that has really just sort of given it much more focus about how things have changed.
But even looking back at the last decade or two, there has been a massive shift in terms of where the power lies, if it's in the employer or the employee. And the employee, I don't know if it's something that has been given or if it's just taken, but there is a different shift in terms of I'm taking my rights here rather than I'm just being told what to do. So I think this has almost come to like an extreme version of what was a sensible maybe power shift. And now that it's become more in terms of, in all the things that we do in life, like there's so many more choices, there's so much more activeness in everything that we do, and that has come to the employer-employee relationship as well. But I agree with you that there is a really positive here, and I think that can be the good outcome of it, and there is the negativity when it's done, like you said, in silence, and that's, I guess, where the quiet comes in the quiet quitting. But if it's something that can be talked about, and what is the balance, then it can just turn into something really great.
Just before I'd like to explore that positive and negative aspect of it a little bit more, but you mentioned the pandemic, and it's very easy for us with a lot of things going on in the world at the moment to blame COVID-19 and what happened there. But Microsoft surveyed 30,000 people across 30 different countries, looking at how the pandemic affected our work, and they found that it had profoundly affected the way that we do work. So in some ways it's given us a lot of positives, so it's given us flexibility in the workplace that we didn't have before, but at the same time it's causing digital exhaustion, particularly amongst our younger workforce. Interestingly, at the same time, 61% of business leaders, so with that you'd expect a level of kind of experience or maturity and age, found that they were doing really well as a result of that position. So there may as well be a slight disconnect, and what you're talking about with engagement is that actually becoming a widening gap for us in terms of the engagement and people and businesses and leaders really understanding the needs and the experiences that the younger generation are having in the workforce.
I agree, sometimes we do blame the pandemic too much and it's easy, but for me there's a few points that the pandemic has sort of brought around this quiet quitting or the engagement. So one aspect is the start of it. So we went into lockdown and I think people missed the work, they missed the social side, they missed the offices. But then as the pandemic went on for longer, it started to readdress the balance. So for certain corporates and certain offices, we've got the gym membership, you've got the coffee house, you've got all of these sort of luxuries sort of on tap. Some offices where they've got hairdressers and post offices and all of these things. So people missed that initially. But once the lockdown sort of went in, certainly in the UK, went in for longer periods, people were then starting to sort of feel that actually what did they value most and were they really important? And actually starting to look at family time and where you were going out for walks and all of those sort of things. So that had an impact. I think then how businesses engaged with their employees during the pandemic. I had colleagues who had pretty much zero engagement. Other companies were sending out sort of packs of cards or advent calendars or whatever it may, packs of tea, just to sort of connect in and sort of make sure they weren't being missed. So those sort of engagement. And then you've got the bit on the back of the pandemic as we're now coming back to work. So you've got a lot of companies with offices that do cost, and it's how they then bring those employees back. And if you start to get into the way of telling people to come into the office and forcing people, that's got people's backs up. So we've got to change that. So yes, I think the pandemic is important, but for a number of different reasons in those aspects.
Mm-hmm. So Matilda, you talked about the positives of quiet quitting. What do you see those as being?
I mean, it's first of all, I think it's opened a conversation that we need to talk about work-life balance, and there's obviously a need of looking at, what is work, what is working hours, can it be done in a different way? What if you need to take care of someone, pick up your kids, get a hairdresser appointment in London? We all know how crazy that is. Is it really harmful if that is done at 2:00 on a Wednesday, if it doesn't interrupt your schedule? So I think there is a positivity in that. And obviously it doesn't work maybe across all industries. And we're talking maybe about a different type of workforce or company. But in general, I think those kind of open conversations are just really good. And like we were discussing before, in the long run, and me being a very positive human in general, but I really think that it can bring upon both, respect between the employer and the employee that hasn't maybe existed before. And if you look at traditional older companies, but also a lot of, responsibility taking of, right, okay, I do get this hour off to pick up my kids and that's really valuable time for me. I need to make up that time and make sure that I still do complete. If we get to that point, I think we're in a much better space. So, hopefully if, it's not being taken for granted in one way, then I think there can be a positive outcome.
And there is that, for me, there's a bit in the middle. So you've got employer, employee, but there's that management layer. And, for me, when I started out in management, you had excessive training on how to be a good manager. And I think that's something that a lot of people, and you see a lot of the research and reports, that there's less and less focus being on training on how to be a good manager. So yes, the employer from the office and how to create that culture, the employee for their own sanity and well-being, but there's this management structure. So how do you keep that sort of line management, people management skills in terms of connecting and engaging with people, with staff, to make sure that you avoid any potential pitfalls.
And for me, a lot of it's around the why. If you've got to look at why a person's behaviour or actions are the way that they are. And it might be that might be something as simple and harmless as they've had a very intense period of activity, end of year, intense engagement, whatever that might be. And they just need a little bit of rebalancing time again, just to get themselves back to a great place so that they're ready for that next intense burst. So I think that, you're right, sometimes there is this negativity associated with the phrase quiet quitting in the media, and not on the TikTok videos that are out there, but really around the kind of the news aspect of it. And sometimes you almost pick up this, are people just being a little bit lazy? Why are they disconnecting in the way that they are? But it comes back to that why. They might just need to recharge their batteries. They might be disillusioned with their job, as you say, and actually then that's a conversation that really needs to be picked up by the leader. There are all sorts of reasons. It isn't necessarily a reflection on the type of person they are, it's the type of environment that they've perhaps been operating in for a while.
But sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the remote working, and not to jump onto the pandemic again, but that remote working has created a layer on it, because you always knew what it was like when you're in the office and someone leaves at 4:00. You'd have the sort of the banter of half day and everything else. So it changes very much in remote working, and it's the same. But if you go into the office and you're in a workshop, you're in a meeting all day, you don't really worry about it. But if you're at home and suddenly you take 10 minutes out to go and put the washing out, whatever it may be, there's suddenly that sort of added pressure on yourself that you're working at home. So there's a dynamic there that people are missing, I think.
There's a couple of things that that come to mind as you say that. One is trust, and that's always a big conversation in the workplace. If somebody does leave at 4:00, in some cultures the immediate thought is, oh, they're slacking off, they're going home early. In others it might be, oh, they've obviously got a personal commitment that they need to attend. I'm sure they'll be online later on again, and that they are fulfilling their whole role. So trust is a really, really important thing these days. Whether it be because of the pandemic or quite quitting or whatever that is.
You're right, and that trust is key, isn't it? Because it's that engagement piece and not micromanaging, but focusing more on the outcomes.
But it goes both ways, because as an employee, you also need to have the trust that you are not looked upon every single minute.
Absolutely.
In the same way that an employer needs to trust that the employee.
And this is the key bit for how employees are going to manage this going forward. So there's a fear, certainly from what we're reading in the newspapers, the press, newspapers, who reads those these days? But there's a lot of noise out there around CEOs and fear, because the quiet aspect is they're not knowing, and are these people going to leave? What are they doing? So how they react if employers start to become too micromanaging and too measurement focused, that could have the negative impact in the longer term.
But about negativity as well, because even the words quiet and quitting are too quite negative. What if it was positive breaking or positive leave? I don't know, we're just making things up as we go.
Positive breaking, I like that, that's good.
Are you on TikTok? Because you should get that.
No, I'm actually not, but I will consider it after today.
Because at the end of the day, it's quite interesting, isn't it? And I'm not advocating this at all, but actually what we're doing is we're creating a whole thing around somebody who's actually just saying, I'm going to do my job properly. I'm going to do it in the hours that I'm being contracted to do, and then I'm going to go away and have, enrich the other part of my life. Are we actually creating negativity and criticism around somebody just doing a great job within their hours? Shouldn't we all be aspiring to do that in a way?
I agree, but there's cultural aspects, there's generational differences. I remember being in Korea, and in the hotel, connecting in with my colleague for the next day, going into the office, and I was of the sort, you were in there 8:00 at the latest, you'd been early, so it was like, I'll meet you early. He was like, no, 9:00 we start, and it was 9:00, and there was breaks, there was lunchtime, 5:00 finished, and it was like, wow, this is unbelievable. But my natural instinct at that time was to think, so you're just, you're not getting up until late or whatever. He was in the library at 7:00 in the morning researching his own book. So there's this sort of hidden thing of knowing. So cultures can be different, but you're absolutely right, Jacqs, in terms of how people are focusing on different aspects of their job, and then how the employees see that. Are they doing their job to the best of their capability is where we should be focusing.
Yeah.
But then it's also about, I kind of think that you get out what you put in, right? So I think it can become a danger if it's, I'm going to climb the ladder and I'm just going to do 9 to 5, and at 5:00, independent of where I am in my day, I'm just going to clock out, keeping that distance. It requires something else that maybe isn't measurable in terms of hours and stuff, that you can't be 18 years old and after 2 years of doing 9 to 5 and just keeping that distance, just saying, like, why am I not area manager?
So interestingly, on the example I gave about career, there was the measurement side from the employer, which they were looking. They had an issue of burnout, so they were actually sort of measuring and pushing. So people that were working late hours, that was raising a bit of a flag and a bit of a warning, because they were concerned that was going to lead to burnout. So how those.
Yeah, but again, it comes back to the why, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I think you're absolutely right. I was playing devil's advocate slightly. I was going, well, shouldn't we all be aspiring to that? Because the reality is that that's not what most of our working lives look like. Particularly if we do want to progress, then it is about, not just delivering what your line manager tasks you with doing in your objective setting session, but it is about exceeding that. And we all want to do a great job at work. And when you referred to your Korean colleague, you mentioned quite quickly that they were in the library at 7:00 in the morning researching a book, right? So yes, that might have been their presence in the office, but obviously they had a real motivation over here to be achieving and driving their learning or broadening in another way. So yes, I think we all still recognise that if you do want to get ahead, it is about exceeding and being brilliant in the workplace, whether that is directly linked to time, which is a lot for some people, whether it has to be is perhaps another thing. So just so we remind you, so we talked about many of us want to get ahead at work, we're ambitious and want to achieve in our professional lives. Does that have to be directly linked to the amount of time that we are sitting working in an office or at home?
Yeah, and that kind of ties back to what you said in the beginning, that there can be two coins of quiet quitting, because what you're saying makes sense, but it only makes sense if you think that fundamentally all people want to be great at work and people want to put in the hours and people want to progress. That's not something that I think should be taken for granted, that everyone wants to become a CEO and everyone wants to. There are a lot of people that are fine just being line managers and, you know, going to work Monday to Friday, having the salary and just fine with that. But I think that's kind of where the other side of the coin comes in, of someone maybe who doesn't want to progress then in that way of that, you know, we're being taught at university that this is the one only way that you should go. So yeah, there is a positive and negative on two sides.
Yeah, we all have very different lives, we all have very different motivations, and those flow and ebb and flow, they change over time as well. You know, you might go through a period of your life where, I mean, the one that comes to mind because I'm a working mum is when you have children, right? You've got small babies. Actually, at that point in time, I wasn't thinking about what my next promotion was at all. I was thinking about, I still absolutely wanted to go in and enjoy my job and do my best. But actually, my mental focus was really my small kids.
There's a really interesting, some of the discussions around quiet quitting have sort of gone down that avenue a little bit. So it's brought to life some of the aspects of, you know, whether it is women with children or single versus people that are married and got partners, etc. So in the office of when suddenly there's a project that you've got to stay late, there was this sort of thing of going to the person that's single. Well, you know, you can stay late because you haven't got a life. And so there's an element of discussion that's coming to life there around sort of quiet quitting in that space as well.
You talked earlier about career and it just made me think, Matilda, so you weren't born in the UK.
No.
So do you see a variation across different countries in terms of how quiet quitting is viewed?
So obviously, having worked in London, UK for quite a while now, I actually had to reach out to some of my Swedish friends before this and just trying to understand, like, what does quiet quitting look like in Sweden? And my main surprise was that they didn't know what it was. Mental well-being and well-being in general, just between life and work, and I think that's Sweden is looked upon like as quite a good model in general when you talk about globally of, you know, how Swedish companies operate. Paternity leave is a huge thing, right? Like there is equality in every single aspect that you could possibly have. So they didn't really know about it, to be completely honest.
Okay, so is it that quiet quitting is more prevalent in cultures where people are responding to a need for it? Is it perhaps not so prevalent in Sweden because it's just not, people don't feel that they need it in the same way? They don't need to push back or reject that whole workaholic and the expectations of them from the offices.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it goes back to that why, right? Of why it's become so different. And I mean, even physically, UK and Sweden are quite close to each other, and we're very similar in a lot of other cultures. But I actually don't know the reason why. I was trying to figure it out yesterday. But for me personally, what I learned in the last days talking to my friends is that it comes back to the whole trust thing. And I think just that the trust is there and that the responsibility is taken. I mean, you know, in Sweden we're talking about reducing working hours to 35 hours a week. Does that mean that everyone is going to work 35 hours? No, of course not. Like a lot of people are, you know, still working 40, 50 hours a week just because you need to get the job done. But that means, like to your point before, that week when you need to like just take it down after a big project, you can do that. That is no problem.
So what are the opportunities around this? You know, because we're all quite positive people. So we've recognised, probably not all of them, but we've recognised that there are some drivers here, some why people are behaving in that way, or why this is quiet quitting is such a phenomenon at the moment. What are the learnings from this that we need to take? What are the opportunities to help people in a different way?
And you're right, we are positive, and I think there is great opportunities because the positive side is people wrestling back what's important to them, their own well-being, their own sort of personal journey, and we push that as sort of management. You push that for people all the time. What's important to you? What's your principles? What's your values? So I think that's positive. It's encouraging people to have conversations and drive that. I sort of always recall back to different companies, and there was one where their sort of reward and recognition was sort of hidden. They did reward people, but not outwardly in front of everyone. And the concern and worry was that they were creating difficult conversations for management in other ways. Whereas you've got companies that do a lot of reward and recognition, you see the benefit long term. So opportunity-wise, it's going to change, I think, for the individuals, but also for companies to how to really look at engagement and getting the best. I do think unfairly some of the generations are getting sort of pointed at and blamed. So you've got the millennials or the Gen Z, they want a career, they want to be challenged, they want to work in that sort of niche spot. So it's how employees, it can only be good if it creates good conversations.
Yeah.
Long as you talk about it.
A lot of pressure as well is being put on employers, I think, with this as well, because, it almost becomes like, oh, if this is not good enough, I'm just going to go somewhere else. If you cannot, let me leave on Wednesdays at 2:00 in the afternoon, I'm just going to go to somewhere else where, so I think there is a negative spin. It puts a lot of pressure on employers. And, now you have to have a gym, you have to have, like you said, a hairdresser and free coffee and, right, left and center. So,
but I think so we talked about trust, but then there's also transparency. So I think if the pressure is there and employers sort of retreat back from sharing, in terms of, we all know that there's pressure on costs for offices and office space and how to use that and what to change. So I always think that companies that engage very well with their workforce are the ones that are going to succeed better.
Of course.
An example long ago, but the Swiss Army knife in that sense. The Swiss Army knife was for every sort of child in terms of scouts or guides and everything else. But 9/11 made a massive shift in that suddenly it wasn't permitted to. Of course, you weren't going to carry sort of knives onto a plane and things like that. But as a company, they engaged with their workforce and said, we've got a challenge. How do we pivot? How do we change? What do we do? Do we close? Do we change? And you now look at that company in terms of the bags and apparel and all sorts of things that they're selling and doing. They've become really successful. And that was because they engaged with their workforce.
We need different organisations than we had 50, 60 years ago, don't we? We need different style of leadership, less directive, more leaders who understand and listen and create an experience that enhances people's lives rather than just pushes them to be, actually, you have to be this person at work, you have to forego some of your other parts of your life at some point, this is what we want of you. They have to really truly try and understand the whole of people's lives, don't they, to properly engage them and help them have that great career that actually most people do want, right? It just looks different to different people, but most people want to have a great professional journey and experience, but it's about how to bring out the best in people, really, isn't it?
Well, it's training, isn't it, on that aspect? So we do the leadership and coaching aspect, but also, you think about the training and management. I remember, when in some industries, in some places, the work from home on a Friday, so way before the pandemic. And the difference is that a lot of managers had their fear is, well, what are they doing on a Friday? And it was like, why are you worrying? Surely you should be worrying about their objectives of what they're completing that month or that, that quarter, whatever it is. Why are you worried about the Friday? Where's your fears?
Where's the trust again?
Absolutely. So yes, they are catching up and doing stuff and putting the washing on or whatever it may be. Is that not a good thing? That means they come in Monday even more engaged. So I think there is a training piece for how we coach, not just obviously leaders. We've got that in terms of our capability and leadership training that we do, but the management level as well. How to engage, how to have those conversations, how to build that trust.
And I think not having the conversation is what creates fear. And that's where the good of the quiet quitting could potentially, end up, because obviously we're having a conversation about it.
So it can only be a good thing that this is being talked about so much. It's all about people's well-being. It's about their happiness and satisfaction at work. And what we kept bringing up time and time again through this conversation, it's about trust. And that goes both ways. It's about engaging your workforce. It's about listening to people properly. It's about creating great relationships where people can be at their best and delivering the best that they can for their organisations. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today. It's been very enlightening and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Jacqs. Thanks, Mark.